October 14th, Silvercreek County. 17-year-old Chloe Elizabeth Vance sat at the defense table, but she was not acting like a girl facing life in prison. She wore a designer blazer, soft pink lip gloss, and a smirk that suggested she had already won. For Chloe, this was not justice. It was an act. She had convinced her followers, and nearly the jury, that she was the victim of a tragic coincidence, initially charged only with minor tampering. She laughed in the judge's face during the preliminary hearing, certain that the lack of a murder weapon meant her freedom. But she made one fatal mistake. She forgot that in a smart home, the walls are always watching. A single recovered video file from a hidden thermostat camera would destroy everything. It would transform her from a tragic sweetheart into a calculated monster in the eyes of the world. By the time Judge Thorne spoke her name for the last time, the performance would be over, and the laughter would be replaced by the cold, heavy sound of a cell door locking forever. The courthouse steps were crowded with media vans on the morning of the arraignment. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras trained on the entrance where Chloe Elizabeth Vance would soon appear. Inside, the courtroom smelled of old wood and furniture polish. The benches were packed with spectators, some who had driven hours just to catch a glimpse of the girl who had become an overnight sensation on social media. They whispered among themselves, comparing notes on what they had read online, debating whether the pretty teenager could possibly be guilty of something so heinous. Chloe entered through a side door, flanked by two bailiffs. She wore an orange jumpsuit with a white undershirt beneath it, standard issue for inmates awaiting trial. But somehow, on Chloe, even the unflattering uniform looked deliberate, almost styled. Her long blonde hair had been carefully arranged over one shoulder. Her makeup was subtle, but perfect. She walked with her chin up, her stride confident, as though she were walking onto a stage rather than into a courtroom where she would be formally charged with crimes that could send her away forever. The bailiffs guided her to the defense table, where her attorney, Marcus Webb, stood waiting. Webb was a veteran defense lawyer in his late 50s, with silver hair and a reputation for taking on difficult cases. He looked tired already, his shoulders slightly hunched as he watched his client approach. Chloe slid into her seat beside him and immediately turned to survey the gallery. Her eyes found the media pool, and she tilted her head just slightly, making sure her good side was angled toward the cameras. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Judge Patricia Thorne entered from her chambers, and everyone in the courtroom rose. Thorne was in her early 60s, a stern woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had been on the bench for 20 years and had presided over some of the county's most high-profile cases. She took her seat and gestured for everyone else to sit. The room fell silent except for the rustle of fabric and the soft creak of wooden benches. The clerk read the charges aloud. Tampering with evidence. Obstruction of justice. The words hung in the air, heavy and formal. Chloe listened with a detached expression, as though the clerk were reading someone else's charges, someone who had nothing to do with her. When the clerk finished, Judge Thorne looked directly at Chloe. "Miss Vance, you have heard the charges against you. How do you plead?" Chloe stood, and Marcus Webb stood with her. She paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch, building the tension. Then she spoke, her voice clear and sweet. "Not guilty, Your Honor." And then, inexplicably, She performed a small curtsy, bending her knees and dipping her head as though she had just finished a performance and was acknowledging applause. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Miss Vance, this is a court of law, not a theatre. You will conduct yourself with the appropriate decorum, or you will be held in contempt. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Chloe said, but her smile did not fade. She sat back down, and as she did, she leaned toward Marcus Webb and whispered something. Several people in the front row heard her say, "Good luck proving it." The lead prosecutor, Sarah Jenkins, stood. She was in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and a fierce intelligence in her eyes. She had built her career on prosecuting violent crimes, and she had a reputation for being relentless. She looked at Chloe with an expression that was equal parts disgust and determination. "Your Honor, the state would like to present a brief overview of the evidence at this time," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, controlled. She moved to the evidence table and picked up a folder, flipping it open. On September 28th, the defendant's best friend, Madison Riley, was found dead in the defendant's home. The scene was pristine. Bleach had been used extensively. Every surface had been wiped down. The defendant claims she found Miss Riley already deceased and, in a state of panic, began cleaning due to what she describes as obsessive-compulsive disorder. Sarah paused and looked at the jury box, though it was empty at this stage of the proceedings. Then she turned her gaze to Chloe. "But cleaning a mess is one thing, Miss Vance. Erasing a soul is another." Chloe's smile faltered for just a second, but then it returned, brighter than before. She whispered to Marcus Webb again, but this time louder, making sure the prosecutor could hear. "So dramatic." Judge Thorne's gavel came down hard. "Miss Vance, you will remain silent unless addressed directly by the court or unless you are conferring privately with your attorney. One more outburst and I will have you removed from this courtroom. Am I clear?" "Crystal, Your Honor," Chloe said, her tone dripping with mock sincerity. The arraignment continued. Sarah Jenkins laid out the state's preliminary case. She showed photographs of the crime scene, the gleaming kitchen floor, the spotless countertops, the faint chemical smell that had lingered for days. She described how the defendant had called 911 at 11:15 that night, claiming she had just arrived home from the gym to find her friend unresponsive. She described how the initial investigation had uncovered inconsistencies in Chloe's timeline, how her story had changed multiple times during questioning, how evidence had been deliberately destroyed. Marcus Webb did his best to counter, arguing that his client was a traumatized teenager who had discovered her best friend dead and had reacted in a way that, while perhaps ill-advised, was not criminal. He pointed out that there was no murder weapon, no direct evidence linking Chloe to any act of violence, only circumstantial evidence of cleaning and poor judgment. When the hearing finally concluded, Chloe was led back out of the courtroom. As she passed the gallery, she caught the eye of a young woman in the front row, someone she recognized from her social media following. Chloe winked at her, a quick conspiratorial gesture that said, "Can you believe this nonsense?" The young woman smiled back, and Chloe felt a surge of satisfaction. The performance was working. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Marcus Webb gave a brief statement, insisting on his client's innocence and condemning what he called a rush to judgment. Inside her holding cell, Chloe sat on a metal bench and replayed the arraignment in her mind. She thought about the way the cameras had focused on her, the way people had leaned forward to hear her speak. She thought about her social media accounts, which her parents were managing while she was detained. Her follower count had tripled in the past 2 weeks. She was famous now, truly famous, in a way she had never been before. Madison had always been the pretty one, the popular one, the one everyone wanted to be around. But now, Madison was gone, and Chloe was the star. The trial began 3 weeks later. The media coverage had only intensified. Every local news station carried live updates. True crime podcasters dissected every detail. Online forums debated Chloe's guilt or innocence with a fervor usually reserved for celebrity scandals. Chloe's social media pages, though she could not access them herself, were flooded with messages. Some people called her a monster. Others insisted she was being railroaded, that she was just a scared girl caught in a nightmare. On the first day of testimony, the courtroom was filled to capacity. Judge Thorne had to call for order twice before the proceedings even began. Chloe sat at the defense table in her orange jumpsuit, her hair freshly styled, her makeup carefully applied. She looked calm, almost serene, as though she were attending a social event rather than a trial that could determine the rest of her life. Sarah Jenkins called her first witness, a teacher from Silvercreek High School named Helen Cartwright. Mrs. Cartwright was in her mid-50s, a gentle woman with kind eyes and a soft voice. She had taught both Chloe and Madison in her English literature class. She took the stand nervously, smoothing her skirt as she sat down. "Mrs. Cartwright," Sarah began, "can you describe Chloe Vance as a student?" "Well, Chloe was always very bright," Mrs. Cartwright said. "She participated in class discussions, turned in her assignments on time. She was polite and well-spoken." "And Madison Riley?" Mrs. Cartwright's expression softened with sadness. "Madison was a wonderful girl. She was kind, always helping other students, always smiling. She and Chloe were very close, or so it seemed." "Did you ever observe any tension between them?" Mrs. Cartwright hesitated. "Not in class, no. But there were a few times when I noticed Chloe would become quiet if Madison received praise for something. It was subtle, but it was there." Marcus Webb stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Cartwright, you said Chloe was a good student, correct?" "Yes." "And you described her as polite and well-spoken?" "Yes." "Would you say she had a good character?" "I would say she presented herself well." "Yes." "Presented herself well," Marcus repeated, as though testing the phrase. "But you believe she had good character, don't you?" "I suppose so, yes." "Thank you, Mrs. Cartwright. No further questions?" As the teacher stepped down, Chloe leaned toward Marcus and whispered, "She loves me." Marcus said nothing, but the tension in his jaw suggested he was not pleased. When the court recessed for lunch, Chloe was escorted to a small conference room where she met with Marcus. He closed the door firmly and turned to face her, his expression grave. "Chloe, you need to stop," he said. "You need to stop smiling. Stop making eye contact with people in the gallery. Stop acting like this is a game." "I'm not acting like anything," Chloe said innocently. "I'm just being myself." "That's the problem," Marcus said. "The jury is going to see you soon, and if you keep this up, they're going to hate you before the prosecution even presents their case. You need to look scared. You need to look like a girl who's terrified of what's happening to her." "But I'm not scared," Chloe said. They don't have anything. No weapon, no direct evidence. It's all just guessing. They have enough to make you look guilty, Marcus said. And if you keep acting like you're auditioning for a reality show, they won't need much more. Chloe sighed and rolled her eyes. Fine. I'll tone it down. Happy? Marcus studied her for a long moment, and in that moment, he felt a chill run down his spine. He had defended a lot of clients over the years, some guilty, some innocent, but he had never defended someone who seemed so utterly disconnected from the gravity of the situation. He wondered, not for the first time, what kind of person sat behind those pretty eyes. The afternoon session brought the first major blow to the defense. Sarah Jenkins called Detective Raymond Miller to the stand. Miller was a veteran investigator in his late 40s with a crew cut and a no-nonsense demeanor. He had been the lead detective on the case from the beginning, and he had spent weeks piecing together the timeline of that night. Detective Miller, Sarah said, can you walk us through your initial investigation? Miller nodded. We received the 911 call at 11:15 post-meridium on September 28th. The caller, Miss Vance, reported finding her friend unresponsive. We arrived on scene at 11:23. When we entered the residence, we immediately noticed a strong chemical smell, later identified as bleach. What else did you observe? The kitchen and hallway were spotless. Too spotless. The floors were wet, recently mopped. The counters were gleaming. It didn't look like a place where someone had just died. It looked staged. Did you interview Miss Vance that night? We did. She claimed she had been at the gym and came home to find her friend. She said she had cleaned because she panicked and her obsessive-compulsive disorder kicked in. But when we checked her story, things didn't add up. Can you elaborate? Miller pulled out a small notebook and flipped through it. Miss Vance claimed she left for the gym at 8:30 post-meridium and returned around 11. But when we checked with the gym, they have a key fob entry system. Her fob was never used that evening. She never entered the building. A murmur went through the gallery. Chloe shifted in her seat, her smile fading slightly. She leaned toward Marcus and whispered, They can't prove anything with that. Maybe the system was broken. Marcus ignored her, his eyes fixed on the detective. What else did you discover? Sarah asked. We examined the home's wireless internet router, Miller continued. The logs showed that the wireless network was manually turned off at 10:02 post-meridium that evening. It was turned back on at 11:10 post-meridium, just 5 minutes before the 911 call. Why is that significant? Most people don't manually toggle their wireless internet on and off, especially not during the evening hours, and the timing is suspicious. If Miss Vance was at the gym, as she claimed, she wouldn't have been home to turn off the wireless internet. But if she was home, and if something happened during those hours when the network was off, there would be no digital record of it, no smart device logs, no cloud uploads, nothing. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Sarah let it settle before continuing. Did you find any other evidence that contradicted Miss Vance's statement? Yes. We searched the storm drains in the neighborhood as part of our routine investigation. 3 blocks from the residence, we found a gym bag. Inside were rags soaked in bleach and what appeared to be blood. The deoxyribonucleic acid on those rags matched the victim, Madison Riley. Chloe's leg began to bounce under the table, a nervous tic she could not control. She forced herself to stop, but her hands gripped the edge of the table tightly. Marcus Webb stood for cross-examination, but his heart was not in it. Detective Miller, you said the gym key fob system showed no entry. Is it possible the system malfunctioned? It's possible, but unlikely, Miller said. The system logs every entry and exit with a timestamp. It's very reliable. And the gym bag. You found it 3 blocks away. How can you be certain it belonged to my client? We found identification inside. A student identification card with Miss Vance's name and photo. Marcus had no response to that. He sat down, and Chloe glared at him, her expression tight with frustration. Over the next several days, the prosecution built their case piece by piece. They called the medical examiner, Dr. Lawrence Hayes, a man in his 60s with a calm, clinical demeanor. Dr. Hayes had performed the autopsy on Madison Riley, and his testimony was devastating. Dr. Hayes, Sarah Jenkins said, can you describe the injuries you observed on Miss Riley's body? The victim sustained a severe trauma to the back of the head, Dr. Hayes said. The injury was consistent with being struck by a blunt object. There was significant hemorrhaging and the skull was fractured. Would this injury have caused immediate death? No, Dr. Hayes said, and the words seemed to echo in the silent courtroom. Based on the hemorrhaging patterns and the condition of the tissues, I believe Miss Riley was alive for approximately 20 minutes after the initial trauma. She would have been unconscious, but she was alive. Could she have been saved? If emergency medical services had been called immediately, there's a possibility, yes, but without treatment, the outcome was inevitable. Sarah paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. Then she asked, so, if someone had found her immediately after the injury and called for help, she might have survived? Yes, Dr. Hayes said. That's correct. In the gallery, Madison's mother, Karen Riley, let out a strangled sob. Her husband put his arm around her, and she buried her face in his shoulder. The jurors, who had been seated earlier that day, watched with solemn expressions. Several of them glanced at Chloe, who sat at the defense table with a bored expression, tapping her pen against her notepad. Judge Thorne noticed. Miss Vance, she said sharply, stop that noise. Chloe looked up, startled, and then she sighed audibly. Oh, please, she muttered, just loud enough to be heard. The courtroom froze. Judge Thorne's expression darkened. What did you just say? Chloe realized her mistake and tried to backtrack. Nothing, Your Honor. I'm sorry. I didn't mean anything. You will conduct yourself with respect in my courtroom, Miss Vance, or I will hold you in contempt. Am I understood? Yes, Your Honor, Chloe said, but her tone suggested she did not take the warning seriously. The prosecution continued to build their case. They presented forensic evidence, including high-intensity ultraviolet photographs of the crime scene. Even after the extensive cleaning with bleach, luminol had revealed blood spatter patterns that told a story. The forensic analyst, a young woman named Dr. Emily Chen, explained the findings with precision. The blood spatter indicates that the victim was struck in this location, Dr. Chen said, pointing to a diagram of the kitchen. The pattern suggests she fell here and then remained in this position for several minutes. But what's most significant is this area here. She pointed to a spot several feet away. There are transfer patterns indicating that someone stood in this exact location for an extended period. The footwear impressions suggest the person was wearing athletic shoes, size 7, which matches the defendant's shoe size. What does it mean that someone stood there? Sarah asked. It means Someone was watching, Dr. Chen said simply. They weren't helping. They weren't calling for assistance. They were just standing there, watching the victim die. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Thorne called for order, her gavel striking 3 times before silence returned. Chloe sat very still, her face pale, her previous smirk completely gone. For the first time since the trial began, she looked genuinely shaken. Marcus Webb did his best during cross-examination, but the evidence was damning. He tried to suggest that the blood patterns could have been misinterpreted, that the footwear impressions could have been from a first responder, but Dr. Chen was unshakable. The science was solid, and she had the credentials and experience to back it up. As the days turned into weeks, the prosecution continued to dismantle Chloe's narrative. They presented evidence of her motive, calling witnesses who testified about the increasing tension between Chloe and Madison in the weeks before the murder. They presented social media records showing that Chloe had created a secret account, a burner profile, where she vented her true feelings. The investigator who had uncovered the account, a digital forensics specialist named Mark Torres, testified about what he had found. The account was created using a fake name, but we were able to trace it back to Miss Vance's Internet Protocol address. The content was disturbing. There were multiple posts complaining about the victim, referring to her as someone who needed to be cancelled, who was stealing the spotlight. Sarah Jenkins displayed some of the posts on a screen for the jury to see. One read, "She thinks she's so perfect. But she's not. Everyone loves her and forgets I exist. I'm tired of being invisible. Maybe if she wasn't around, people would finally notice me." Another read, "Viral fame is everything. One big moment and you're set for life. One big moment and everyone remembers your name." And the most chilling, "She needs to go. I'm done playing second fiddle." The jurors read the post in silence, their faces grim. Several of them looked at Chloe with open disgust. Chloe, for her part, stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched, her hands folded tightly in her lap. During a recess, Marcus Webb pulled Chloe aside again. "We need to talk about a plea deal," he said urgently. "Sarah Jenkins might be willing to negotiate. You could plead guilty to manslaughter, avoid the first-degree murder charge." "No," Chloe said firmly. "I'm not pleading guilty to anything. They don't have proof I killed her. They have circumstantial evidence, that's all." "Circumstantial evidence is still evidence," Marcus said. "And it's piling up. The jury is already turning against you. I can see it in their faces." "Then do your job and change their minds," Chloe snapped. "That's what I'm paying you for, isn't it?" Marcus stared at her, and for a moment he considered withdrawing from the case entirely. But he had a professional obligation, and he was not the type to abandon a client no matter how difficult. "Fine," he said, "but you need to start taking this seriously. You need to stop acting like you're untouchable, because you're not." Chloe said nothing, but the defiant glint in her eyes told Marcus everything he needed to know. She still believed she would win. She still believed she was smarter than everyone else in that courtroom. The prosecution called Madison Riley's younger sister, Emily, to the stand. Emily was 15, a quiet girl with her sister's same soft features and gentle eyes. She walked to the stand slowly, her hands trembling. When she sat down, she looked out at the courtroom and then at Chloe. Her expression was one of pure grief and confusion. "Emily," Sarah Jenkins said gently, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell the jury about your sister." Emily nodded, tears already streaming down her face. "Madison was the best person I knew," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was kind and funny, and she always looked out for me. When I was being bullied at school, she stood up for me. When I was sad, she made me laugh. She was my best friend." "Were you surprised when you learned that Chloe had been charged?" Emily wiped her eyes with a tissue. "At first, yes. Madison always talked about how close she and Chloe were. But then I remembered things. I remembered how Chloe would get quiet when Madison got attention. I remembered how Chloe always had to be the center of everything. And if she wasn't, she would get this look on her face, like she was angry. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it makes sense. What would you like to say to Chloe, if you could?" Emily looked directly at the defendant. Chloe met her gaze, but said nothing. "I want to know why," Emily said. "Madison loved you. She trusted you. Why would you hurt her? Why would you take her away from us?" Chloe's expression did not change, but her knuckles were white as she gripped the table. She did not answer, because she could not. There was nothing she could say that would make sense, nothing that would justify what she had done. Marcus Webb chose not to cross-examine Emily. There was nothing to be gained from questioning a grieving teenager, and it would only make the jury hate Chloe more than they already did. As the trial entered its third week, the prosecution announced that they had one final piece of evidence, something that had been recently recovered and verified. Sarah Jenkins stood before the court with a quiet confidence that sent a chill through the room. "Your Honor," she said, "the state would like to call James Whitaker, a technician from Secure Nest Technologies, to the stand. James Whitaker was a young man in his late 20s with glasses and a nervous demeanor. He took the stand and was sworn in, his hand shaking slightly as he placed it on the Bible. "Mr. Whitaker," Sarah said, "can you explain what Secure Nest Technologies does?" "We manufacture smart home devices," Whitaker said. "Thermostats, security cameras, doorbell cameras, that sort of thing. Our products are connected to the internet and can be controlled remotely through an application." "And did the Vance residents have any of your products installed?" "Yes, they had one of our smart thermostats in the hallway." "Can you explain how your thermostats work?" Whitaker nodded. "The thermostat monitors the temperature and adjusts the heating or cooling system accordingly. But it also has a built-in camera for security purposes. The camera activates when it detects motion, and it records short clips that are uploaded to the xCloud." "What happens to those clips?" "Normally they're stored in the user's account for 30 days and then deleted. But we also have a safety feature. If the system detects what it considers to be an emergency event, such as rapid temperature changes, smoke, or unusual motion patterns, it saves those clips to a separate partition that cannot be deleted by the user. This is for safety and liability purposes." Sarah paused, letting that information settle. "And did the thermostat in the Vance residence record any such emergency event on the night of September 28th? "Yes," Whitaker said. "The system detected unusual motion patterns and saved several clips to the secure partition." "Were you able to retrieve those clips?" "Yes. After we were contacted by law enforcement, we accessed the secure partition and retrieved the files. We verified their authenticity using our internal protocols." "Can you describe what those clips show?" Whitaker took a deep breath. "The clips show the hallway outside the kitchen. They show a person, later identified as the defendant, Chloe Vance, standing in the hallway. She appears to be looking at something on her phone. In the background, you can see the victim, Madison Riley, on the floor, moving slightly. The defendant does not go to help her. Instead, she remains in the hallway for approximately 6 minutes. The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on Whitaker, and every ear was straining to hear his next words. "What is the defendant doing during those 6 minutes?" Sarah asked. "She appears to be practicing facial expressions in a mirror that's visible on the wall. She makes several different faces, checking her appearance. At one point, she takes out what looks like a makeup compact and adjusts her mascara. Then she dials a number on her phone, presumably 911, and while the call is connecting, she arranges her hair and takes a few deep breaths as though preparing for a performance. The gallery erupted. People gasped, shouted, cried out in disbelief and horror. Judge Thorne's gavel came down repeatedly, but it took several minutes for order to be restored. Madison's mother was sobbing openly, her cries echoing through the courtroom. The jurors sat in stunned silence, several of them with their hands over their mouths. Chloe had gone completely still. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with shock. She looked at Marcus Webb, and he looked back at her with an expression that said, "I told you so." "Your Honor," Sarah Jenkins said, her voice steady despite the chaos, "the state would like to present Exhibit 44B, the video file recovered from the Secure Nest thermostat." Judge Thorne nodded. "Proceed." The lights in the courtroom dimmed, and a screen was lowered from the ceiling. The technicians set up the video, and then it began to play. The footage was grainy but clear enough. It showed the hallway from a slightly elevated angle, the lens of the thermostat capturing the scene in high definition. The timestamp in the corner read September 28th, 10:53 post-meridium. Chloe Vance entered the frame. She was wearing athletic clothes, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked down at her phone, scrolling through something, her expression calm. In the background, partially visible through the kitchen doorway, was Madison Riley. She was on the floor, her body moving weakly, one arm reaching out as though trying to crawl. Chloe glanced towards the kitchen, saw Madison, and then looked back at her phone. She did not run to help. She did not call for assistance. She simply stood there, scrolling, as though nothing was wrong. Then Chloe moved to the mirror on the wall. She set her phone down on a small table and looked at her reflection. She tilted her head, widened her eyes, let her mouth fall open in an expression of shock. She did this several times, adjusting the angle, perfecting the look. She practiced putting her hands to her face, practiced the way her shoulders would tremble as though she were crying. At one point, she smiled, satisfied with her performance. Then she checked her phone again, glanced back at the kitchen where Madison was now completely still, and pulled out a small makeup compact. She applied a touch of mascara under her eyes, smudging it just slightly to create the appearance of running makeup, the kind that would suggest she had been crying. Finally, she picked up her phone and dialed a number. As the call connected, she took several deep breaths, composing herself. Then her voice came through, panicked and breathless. "Help. Please, I need help. My friend, she's not breathing. I just came home and found her. Please, you have to send someone." The video ended, and the lights came back up. The courtroom was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of what they had just witnessed was crushing. Sarah Jenkins stood and faced the jury. The defendant claims she found her friend already dead, that she panicked and cleaned out of fear and obsessive compulsion. But this video shows the truth. She stood by while Madison Riley died. She did not call for help when it might have mattered. Instead, she spent 6 minutes preparing to play the role of the grieving friend. She rehearsed her shock. She staged her tears. She curated a tragedy for her own benefit. Chloe was shaking now, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She looked at Marcus Webb, and he could see the panic in her eyes, the realization that everything she had built, all the lies, all the performance, had just collapsed. "Your Honor," Marcus said, standing, "I would like to request a recess to confer with my client." "Denied," Judge Thorne said coldly. "We will continue." Sarah Jenkins called several more witnesses to verify the authenticity of the video. The secure Nest technician explained the metadata, the timestamps, the encryption that proved the file had not been tampered with. A second independent analyst confirmed the findings. There was no doubt. The video was real. When the defense's turn came, Marcus Webb had nothing. He tried to argue that the video did not prove Chloe had caused Madison's injuries, only that she had failed to help. But even he knew how weak that argument was. The jury was not looking at Chloe with sympathy anymore. They were looking at her with contempt. The trial moved quickly after that. The prosecution rested their case, and the defense presented what little they had. They called a psychologist who testified that Chloe might have been in a state of shock, that trauma can cause people to behave irrationally. But the video undermined that argument completely. Shock does not involve practicing facial expressions in a mirror. Shock does not involve applying makeup before calling for help. The closing arguments were brief. Sarah Jenkins stood before the jury and laid out the case one final time. "You have seen the evidence. You have heard the testimony. And you have watched the video that shows exactly who Chloe Elizabeth Vance is. She is not a victim. She is not a girl who made a mistake. She is a predator who killed her best friend for attention, for fame, for the spotlight that she felt she deserved. Madison Riley trusted her, and Chloe repaid that trust with violence and cruelty. The evidence is overwhelming. The conclusion is inescapable. Chloe Vance is guilty of premeditated first-degree murder. Marcus Webb did his best, but his closing argument felt hollow even to him. He asked the jury to consider reasonable doubt, to remember that there was no murder weapon, no confession, but the video had destroyed any chance of acquittal. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreperson stood and delivered the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Chloe Elizabeth Vance, guilty of premeditated first-degree murder with special circumstances." The courtroom erupted again, but this time it was with a sense of relief, of justice served. Madison's family embraced each other, crying tears of both grief and gratitude. Chloe sat frozen at the defense table, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. This was not how it was supposed to end. She was supposed to win. She was supposed to walk free, more famous than ever, the girl who had beaten the system. But the performance was over. Judge Thorne scheduled the sentencing hearing for the following week. When that day came, the courtroom was once again packed. Chloe was brought in wearing her orange jumpsuit, but this time she looked different. Her hair was no longer styled, her makeup was smudged. She looked small, and defeated, a shadow of the confident girl who had walked into the courtroom weeks earlier. The victim impact statements came first. Madison's mother, Karen Riley, took the stand. She was a woman in her mid-40s with the same kind eyes as her daughters. She looked at Chloe with a mixture of sorrow and anger. "You took my daughter from me," Karen said, her voice shaking. "You took her life, and then you tried to take her memory by turning her death into a spectacle. Madison loved you. She trusted you. She would have done anything for you. And you repaid that love by killing her and then dancing on her grave." Karen paused, wiping her eyes. "My family will never be whole again. My youngest daughter has nightmares every night. My husband can barely get out of bed in the morning. We will carry this pain for the rest of our lives. And you, Chloe, you will carry the weight of what you've done. I hope it crushes you." Emily Riley took the stand next. She was small and fragile looking, but her voice was steady. She looked at Chloe and said, "You stole my sister twice, once with a knife or a bat or whatever you used to hurt her, and once with your lies, by trying to make people think she died some other way, by trying to make people forget who she really was. But we won't forget. And the world won't forget. Madison was a good person, and you're not. That's the truth, and no amount of makeup or fake tears will change it." When the victim impact statements concluded, Judge Patricia Thorne looked at Chloe Elizabeth Vance for a long moment. The courtroom was silent, waiting. Then the judge began to speak, and her voice was like steel. "Miss Vance," Judge Thorne said, "this court has witnessed your theater for weeks. You have treated this sanctuary of justice like a social media stage, a platform for your own vanity. You curtsied during your arraignment. You winked at your followers in the gallery. You smirked and sighed and rolled your eyes as though the proceedings were beneath you, as though the life of Madison Riley was nothing more than an inconvenience to your pursuit of fame." Chloe looked up at the judge, and for the first time, her mask cracked completely. Tears began to stream down her face, but they were not the rehearsed tears she had practiced in the mirror. They were real tears, tears of fear and shame and the dawning realization of what her life had become. Judge Thorne continued, her voice growing stronger. "But Exhibit 44B has revealed the truth. That video, recovered from a device you probably forgot even existed, has shown the world exactly who you are. You did not just kill Madison Riley. You stood over her dying body and thought about yourself. You thought about how you would look on camera. You thought about your performance. You practiced your shock, your grief, your horror, all while a girl who loved you was taking her final breaths just feet away." The judge paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "You are not a victim of circumstance, Miss Vance. You are not a troubled teenager who made a mistake. You are a predator of the most hollow kind. You killed for attention. You killed for fame. You killed because you could not bear to live in anyone's shadow, not even the shadow of someone who cared about you." Chloe was hyperventilating now, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She gripped the table, her body shaking. "It's not fair," she choked out. "That video, it wasn't supposed to be saved. It wasn't supposed to exist. How is that fair?" Judge Thorne's expression hardened. "How is it fair?" she repeated, her voice rising. "How is it fair that Madison Riley will never graduate high school, never go to college, never fall in love, never have children, never grow old? How is it fair that her family has to live with a hole in their hearts for the rest of their lives? You talk about fairness as though you are the one who has been wronged. But you are the one who did the wronging. You are the one who committed an act so vile, so selfish, so utterly devoid of empathy that it defies comprehension. The judge took a breath, composing herself. The law provides for certain punishments for certain crimes. In this case, the jury has found you guilty of premeditated first-degree murder with special circumstances. The special circumstances include the fact that you lay in wait, that you allowed the victim to suffer while you prepared your alibi, and that you destroyed evidence in an attempt to evade justice. These circumstances remove any possibility of leniency. Chloe was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. "Please," she whispered. "Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen like this." "You didn't mean for what to happen?" Judge Thorne asked sharply. "You didn't mean to get caught? Because the video shows very clearly that you meant for Madison to die. You meant to stand there and watch. You meant to turn her death into a performance." The judge looked down at her notes, and then she looked back at Chloe. "The sentence of this court is as follows. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will spend the rest of your days in a cell, away from the cameras, away from the spotlight you so desperately craved. And perhaps, in the silence of that cell, you will finally understand the magnitude of what you have done." Chloe let out a wail, a sound of pure anguish. "No, no, no," she cried. "This can't be happening. This isn't how it's supposed to end." Judge Thorne's expression did not soften. "But it is how it ends, Miss Vance. It ends with justice for Madison Riley. It ends with you facing the consequences of your actions. And it ends with the hope that no one else will ever be foolish enough to follow in your footsteps." The judge looked out at the courtroom, at the family of the victim, at the jurors who had served with diligence and care, at the prosecutors who had fought so hard for justice. This court is adjourned. As the bailiffs moved to take Chloe away, she looked at the camera one last time, the camera that had been her constant companion throughout the trial. But this time, there was no smirk, no wink, no carefully arranged expression. There was only the hollow, empty look of someone who had finally realized that the performance was over, that the applause would never come, and that the only audience she would have for the rest of her life would be the four walls of a prison cell. The media coverage in the aftermath was intense. Every news outlet in the country ran stories about the case, about the video, about the sentencing. Social media exploded with commentary, with think pieces, with debates about narcissism and the dangers of fame-seeking behavior. Chloe's follower count, which had been climbing steadily throughout the trial, began to plummet. People unfollowed her by the thousands, then by the tens of thousands. Her pages were flooded with comments condemning her, calling her a monster, expressing relief that justice had been served. 1 month after the sentencing, the state legislature passed a new law, informally known as the Chloe Vance Law. The law mandated that in cases of violent crime, law enforcement would have the authority to access data from smart home devices, including cameras, thermostats, and security systems with proper warrants. The law was designed to ensure that evidence like the thermostat video could be retrieved and used to bring criminals to justice. Madison Riley's family established a scholarship in her name, awarded annually to a student who demonstrated kindness, empathy, and a commitment to helping others. Emily Riley, now 16, spoke at the first scholarship ceremony. "My sister believed in the goodness of people," she said. "Even when people disappointed her, even when they hurt her, she still believed. And I want to honor that by helping students who share her values, who want to make the world a better place." In the state penitentiary, Chloe Elizabeth Vance sat in her 6 by 8 foot cell. She had been assigned to a maximum security unit, and her days were monotonous and bleak. She woke at 6 in the morning, ate breakfast in the common area, and then returned to her cell for most of the day. She had no access to social media, no contact with her former followers, no cameras to perform for. She was just another inmate, just another number in the system. At night, alone in her cell, she sometimes thought about Madison. She thought about the girl who had been her friend, who had trusted her, who had died because Chloe could not bear to share the spotlight. She thought about the video, about the way she had stood there, practicing her expressions, perfecting her performance. And she thought about Judge Thorne's words, the condemnation that had stripped away every last shred of her pretense. "You are a predator of the most hollow kind." The words echoed in her mind, over and over, and she knew they were true. She had killed for attention, for fame, for the belief that being noticed was more important than being good. And now she would spend the rest of her life paying for that belief. The world moved on. New stories dominated the headlines. New trials captured the public's attention. But for the people who had been touched by the case, the memory remained. Madison Riley's family continued to grieve, to heal, to honor her memory. The jurors went back to their lives, carrying with them the knowledge that they had served justice. And Sarah Jenkins, the prosecutor who had fought so hard, moved on to other cases, other victims, other battles for justice. But the story of Chloe Elizabeth Vance and Madison Riley would not be forgotten. It would serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when narcissism and cruelty collide, when the pursuit of fame becomes more important than human life. It would serve as a reminder that in a world where everything is recorded, where smart devices watch and listen, the truth has a way of coming to light. And it would serve as a reminder that justice, though sometimes slow, is ultimately inescapable. In the end, Chloe Elizabeth Vance got what she wanted. She became famous. Her name was known across the country, her face recognized by millions. But the fame she received was not the kind she had imagined. It was the fame of infamy, the fame of a cautionary tale, the fame of a monster. And in her cell, with no audience to perform for, no cameras to capture her carefully arranged expressions, she finally understood the price of that fame. It was everything. It was her freedom, her future, her very soul. And it was a price she would pay for the rest of her life.